And hello again from Fox News in Washington. It's another busy campaign weekend. Missouri continues the process of selecting delegates. Puerto Rico votes today. Then on Tuesday, all eyes will be on Illinois. Joining us now from Moline to talk about where the race stands now is Mitt Romney. Governor, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Brett. Good to be with you.
Let's start with Afghanistan. Tensions between the U.S. and Afghanistan appear to be very high at this point. Afghanistan President Hamid Karzai has accused the U.S. of stonewalling the investigation into the killing of 16 Afghan civilians. In fact, he even suggested there might be more than one shooter. He angrily said Friday, quote, "This has been going on for too long. This is by all means, the end of the rope here." Thursday, he demanded all NATO troops get out of the villages and stay on the major bases there. President Obama, as you know, has publicly said to stay the course until a withdrawal at the end of 2014. Would President Romney do anything different, and if so, how?
Well, first of all, I would exercise leadership. And by that I mean I would work with President Karzai. I would speak with President Karzai regularly, day to day. We have troops in harm's way. We have almost 1,800 men and women who've been killed in Afghanistan. We have real interest in making sure that this ends well and that our mission is successful there of having an Afghanistan that is able to maintain its sovereignty against the Taliban, against ultimately al-Qaeda as well. Look, what's happening right now is an example of failed leadership. The president put out a specific timetable for withdrawal of our troops, a timetable for the end of combat operations. This is leading Mr. Karzai to take action that's self-preservation in nature. The president needs to be more engaged and interacting with not only our commanders there, but also with leadership in Afghanistan.
But would you accelerate the withdrawal?
Well, the timing of withdrawal is going to be dependent upon what you hear from the conditions on the ground. That you understand by speaking with commanders there, as well as, of course, the people in Afghanistan and their ability to maintain their sovereignty and to have the capacity to have a military that can stand up to the challenges they face. The timetable, the guidelines continue to be into effect, unless, of course, there are changes in conditions that suggest a faster withdrawal. But recognize that ultimately, the independence and the security of Afghanistan is going to have to be secured and maintained by the Afghans themselves. We're not going to stay there forever.
Your Republican opponents have a very different tone they've been sounding. Speaker Gingrich said, we're risking lives on a mission that may frankly not be doable. Rick Santorum said we either have to make a full commitment, which he said this president has not done, or we have to decide to get out sooner. And Ron Paul, of course, has maintained his long-held position to withdraw troops from Afghanistan immediately. So are you taking a stand here while much of your party is souring on Afghanistan?
Well, before I take a stand on a particular course of action, I want to get the input from the people who are there. General Allen is going to be coming to Washington and testifying this week about what the conditions are. I think it's very plain to see that the conditions there are not going very well. And I lay part of the blame for that on the lack of leadership on the part of our president. Both in terms of his interaction with Karzai and with leaders there, as well as his relative detachment from our military commanders there, and the fact that he published a specific date for our withdrawal, published a date for withdrawal of our combat operations there, did not oversee elections in Afghanistan that would have convinced the people there that they had elected someone that they could have confidence in, did not put enough troops into the surge as was requested by the military. He certainly takes part of the blame for the failure there, and we're going to get our troops out as soon as we possibly can. But this does have the indications of a similarly failed withdrawal or a failed completion effort on the part of this president, just like we saw in Iraq. He likewise failed in the way we left Iraq, and this is a president that simply does not have experience in tough situations, not negotiating experience, not leadership experience, and it's showing once again the result that one might have expected from lack of leadership.
Let's talk about Iran. What you're seeing and hearing, where do you put the chances that Israel will strike Iran in coming months?
Well, I can't begin to speak for what Israel will do. I think they recognize that Iran's nuclear weaponry presents an existential threat to them. Ahmadinejad has said that he would consider Israel a one-bomb nation. So Israel's timetable may be different than our timetable. The clear, I think, lessons from this are that, one, the president should have put in place crippling sanctions from day one instead of waiting for 3.5 years. Two, he should have spoken out when the dissidents took to the streets in Tehran. Instead, he was silent. And three, he should be less worried about Israel taking military action to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon and more worried about Iran actually having a nuclear weapon and having fissile material. And he should make it very clear that the United States of America will not allow Iran to have nuclear weapons, and that we will take action, including military action if necessary, to prevent that from occurring.
The president said 2 weeks ago that you and Speaker Gingrich and Senator Santorum are speaking casually about war with Iran, saying, quote, if some of these folks think that it's time to launch a war, they should say so. They should explain to the American people exactly why they would do that and what the consequences would be. Everything else is just talk. Your reaction?
Well, it's quite clear that the president wants to avoid in any way a discussion about a military option. But of course, we have to recognize that if all else fails, and he's failed on so many dimensions, it's possible that all else will fail. But I hope not. I hope that crippling sanctions will, now that they're finally beginning to be employed there, will have an impact. I hope that if we aggressively support dissident voices in Iran, that will have an impact. And I hope that showing a military commitment on our part and a recognition that we have a military option, that will change the minds of the Iranians towards their nuclear program. But there's nothing casual about Iran having a nuclear weapon. There's nothing casual about Iran having fissile material they could give to Hamas or Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is now in many parts throughout South America. Look, they're in our hemisphere. Fissile material in our hemisphere with Hezbollah able to potentially bring it into this country. There's nothing casual about that. The president needs to recognize this is a very serious threat to America and to the world, and that, of course, we have to have military options. Israel is obviously developing those options. I hope our president is listening to our military and developing those options as well.
Governor, obviously volatility in the Middle East affects oil prices. Do you believe President Obama is to blame for high gas prices?
Well, there's no question but that when he ran for office, he said he wanted to see gasoline prices go up. He said that energy prices would skyrocket under his views, and he selected 3 people to help him implement that program. The Secretary of Energy, the Secretary of the Interior, and the EPA Administrator. And this gas hike trio has been doing the job over the last 3.5 years, and gas prices are up. The right course is they ought to be fired because the president has apparently suffered a election year conversion. He's now decided that gasoline prices should come down. Well, the gas hike trio has been going in the other direction. Time for them to go, probably hand in their resignations. If he's really serious about that, and start drilling for energy here, whether that's, of course, our oil, our natural gas, take advantage of our coal resources for power generation. It's a very different policy that he's now talking about, and I hope it's a real conversion. Time will tell.
You obviously feel the president's vulnerable on this issue. Looking at the headlines over the past few days, you've been hitting this hard. A number of different headlines suggesting that you've been talking about it a lot. This has obviously become a focus now of your campaign. But less than a month ago, in your speech at the Detroit Economic Club, you didn't have one word about energy policy. And the same was true in your victory speeches in New Hampshire and Florida and your speech in CPAC. Why not a word about that in those speeches? And does it talk to a change in message and the power of this issue?
I've been speaking about energy policy, I think, pretty consistently throughout all my stump speeches. Maybe not every single speech I give, but I've been talking about the need to develop our coal, our oil resources, our natural gas resources. But the reality is that as I've gone across the country in the last several weeks in particular, I'm seeing more and more people, particularly women, for instance, that say to me, it's hard getting kids to school and to the soccer practice when you don't know if you can afford to fill up the car. I spoke with a teacher in St. Louis who was out of work, and she's staying on unemployment because she said, in part, the cost of getting to and from work at a temporary teaching assignment was just so expensive, given gasoline, she couldn't afford to go back to work. Look, these gasoline prices are hurting American families, and that pain. And the result of the president's policies to turn down the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline from Canada, and at the same time put $500 million into Solyndra, these policies are not working. His policies are hurting the American people, and they want to have someone that will finally take advantage of our energy resources, and I will.
Governor, one of the standard lines in your stump speech is on spending, and the test that you would apply in a Romney administration is the program so critical that it's worth borrowing money from China to pay for it. At the Fox-Google debate in September, you said without qualification, quote, "We need to get the federal government out of education." Does this mean eliminating the Department of Education?
Not necessarily. It may be combined with other agencies. There will still be a role, meaning that, for instance, the federal government provides funding to local school districts for care of disabled children. That will be maintained. But the reach of the Department of Education into the states has to be pulled back. Education has to be managed at the state level, not at the federal level. Will there be any flow through of funds to the states? Yes. But the role I see that ought to remain in the president's agenda with regards to education is to push back against the federal teachers' unions. Those federal teachers' unions have too much power. In some cases, they overwhelm the states. They overwhelm the local school districts. We have got to put the kids first and put these teachers' unions behind.
Do you still support No Child Left Behind?
I support the principle of having states test their kids. And one of the things President Bush did that I supported, and I did support No Child Left Behind, and do support continuing to test our kids. I want to know which school districts are succeeding and which ones are failing, and where they are failing, I want there to be action taken to get the teachers' unions out and to get the kids once again receiving the education they need. So I like the idea of testing our kids. No Child Left Behind needs to be changed. I think it's in pretty significant ways before it's reauthorized. But I do support the testing that's been associated with that program, and I'm glad that President Bush pushed for that.
Governor, on the stump, you criticize Rick Santorum for his answer in a recent debate, taking one for the team, and that was casting his vote for No Child Left Behind. But you have been on that team.
Well, I have no problem supporting things I agree with, all right? So I wasn't criticizing Senator Santorum for supporting No Child Left Behind. I'm criticizing Senator Santorum for saying that he opposes it, that it's against his principles, but he voted for it anyway. That, in my opinion, is not the kind of leadership we need to have in this country. Look, we have a couple of guys running against me in this contest who spent their life in the legislature. Nothing wrong with that. It's just not the kind of executive leadership we need to have in Washington today. I actually think this campaign is going to come down to whether we have someone who can go up against President Obama, who has real experience as a leader, who understands how the economy works, not because he's debated it in Congress or in a subcommittee, but because he's lived it in the private sector. And I have. I think that's going to be the fundamental difference between me and President Obama. And I hope that's why people continue to vote for me in this process and give me the nod to become the nominee.
In this race, you've pointed out many times that you've received a lot more votes. In fact, you've received more than 1 million more votes than your nearest competitor, Rick Santorum. And there you see the breakdown on the screen. Your campaign has reportedly raised about $63 million, spent about $55 million. That means in a cost per vote on campaign spending, you've spent $15.83 per vote. Newt Gingrich, $7.76. Rick Santorum, $2.28. And if you also add the spending from the super PACs that support you, you've spent roughly $26 per vote. Gingrich, $15.5, and Santorum, $5.14 per vote. So you've recently criticized Rick Santorum for being an economic lightweight. But purely from a business perspective, Governor, isn't he getting a lot of votes for his money?
There's no question but that in a campaign, one of the things you have to recognize from day one is that you need to organize a financial operation to make sure you can run a campaign. By the way, I've had also Herman Cain to battle, Rick Perry to battle, Tim Pawlenty to battle. This has been a long process, and ultimately, if I become the nominee, I'm going to be going up against President Obama, and he's put together an organization he says will raise about $1 billion. We have to have a nominee who has the capacity to and the organization necessary to raise money to be competitive. I intend to be very competitive with President Obama to make sure that we get our message out and that we defeat him. This is not about a shoestring operation. This is about an operation that can be competitive with the President of the United States and beat him because, by the way, we've got to get him out of office.
Your campaign,
his failed policies on energy, on the economy, internationally, we got to get him out, and that's one of the reasons we've organized such a strong campaign.
Last thing, Governor, your campaign has been